methodical, honest, and transparent with the people of Israel about these risks. We've got to get this right before there's a catastrophic failure. The current design of the project with a nearshore platform, I'll go right to one of the important points here of my review, with a nearshore platform versus an offshore loading option of floating production and storage and offloading at FPSO. It's basically a converted oil tanker used to process gas and condensate, hold the condensate on board, then pipe the dry gas to shore. That or a floating LNG facility out offshore 125 kilometers would be inherently safer than a processing platform 10 kilometers from shore. And it would, by eliminating the platform 10 kilometers offshore, you automatically eliminate all of the impacts from such a platform, including a security and terrorism risk, accidental spills from the platform, noise, the visual aesthetic impact, the pipelines that go, condensate that goes to shore via pipeline. None of that would happen if you have offshore loading. And there are options. Even with the platform having been constructed already, Noble could probably simply put that platform up for sale and lease an FPSO to station out 125 kilometers offshore. It would take some rethinking and reconsideration of the engineering of the project, but you might even get gas to shore quicker that way than with the current design. Regardless, and from an environmental standpoint, and I believe a public safety standpoint, the clear option would be the offshore loading. They had that in the plans in 2014, and for some unknown reasons, that was changed by 2016 for a platform on the shelf. So I'd like to get to the bottom of why that was changed. From a security and terrorism risk standpoint alone, in particular the platform, clearly the further from shore you are, logically, the safer you would be. Now, I know there's some disagreement in that issue from some, but there needs to be a clear, methodical security and terrorism risk assessment done on all the potential options, which is my understanding has yet to be conducted. And that is unfortunate. I think the project right now is not ready for prime time. I think it should slow down, take another methodical look at what the best options are. This is going to be here for 40 years, at least 30 years. So you've got to get it right from the start, and I think there's still time to do that. I have a very serious concern about the risk of catastrophic well blowouts like we've had all over the world, and particularly in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Seabed pipeline failures from the production wells into the platform and from the platform to shore. I don't think those have been adequately mitigated. And failures of the platform, such as fire and explosion risk. I've not seen in the documents adequate documentation that these risks and safety concerns have been adequately considered. I've asked the governments here about it, the ministries. They seem confident. The other thing I want to say is that the other repetitious sort of ideology we've seen here is that the government seems very confident in what they have heard from the industry, and that they are even overconfident that everything is fine. And by my review of the documents, I can assure you that I cannot conclude that everything is fine. In fact, they're using a safety standard which is lower than best available technology, and that's a concern to me. Okay, a few other quick things. The spill modeling they did was not worst case discharge. They modeled the spill from the offshore well drilling of about 175,000 barrels of condensate. They modeled that over about a 30-day period. What we know of offshore well blowouts and failures of well control is they can last much longer than 30 days. They can last over a year in the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico, which is a reservoir similar in ways to the depth, the water depth, and the depth within the seabed It's actually a little deeper here, the Leviathan prospect is, than the Deepwater Horizon. So there's some similarities. Deep water, deep reservoir, high pressure, high temperature, high risk. So this needs to be handled very cautiously.
Okay, you're going to go into more detail about that?
Well, what I'd like to do after I get through here is open it up to questions, and I'd be delighted to go into detail on any element of this. So that's what I'd love to have. So the documents, the Leviathan documents today, do not adequately discuss the unique physical and chemical characteristics of condensate, which is very different than crude oil. It's very different than diesel. And the documents also spectacularly do not address a large-scale natural gas release. This is a natural gas project, and the only thing that the models discuss really in any detail is a condensate release. Condensate is a very light oil, hydrocarbon fluid. It's acutely toxic. And while it's less persistent when it is spilled than crude oil, it still has some persistence. It can last for many months in the environment, particularly as it weathers, and it can become even more toxic. So it's a concern. But the fact that the documents, the project proponents to date have not even considered, that I've seen, a large-scale natural gas release is an issue, and the potential ecological impacts of that. I mentioned the risk reduction standard. There's a huge issue that we discovered in looking at the documents, and that's the amount of redaction. This is one of Noble's environmental impact statements from 2017. This is the drilling environmental impact statement, impact assessment supplement from 2017.
Is this the updated one? Because they changed it.
Well, this is 2017.
No, they didn't change because I took it yesterday night from the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. So this specific document, the memorandum with 19 appendices, which has very significant information, are still redacted.
This is the 2017 supplement to the drilling environmental impacts assessment to the drilling EIA. And the amount of black and out, it's called redaction, is spectacular. These are systems critical, safety critical, technical details that they have just simply eliminated from the documents. I asked at our meetings yesterday with the ministries up in Haifa, why? And they created, they said security and commercial secrets. That is unacceptable for a project with this much public interest and with the sort of consequence for getting it wrong here. There's everything you need to know about the technical details of making this a safe project is simply eliminated from these documents. That is unacceptable. That's a point that needs to get resolved. Now we'll move on here and get done with this. And a couple of other.
Sorry, Rick, what was that called again?
This is the 2017 amendment. I can get to the exact title, but it's the 2017 amendment to the drilling EIA. The drilling EIA was produced in 2016. This is an amendment to it in 2017, and there's just black page after black page after black page. And some of this, by the way, I was able to retrieve. For instance, they redacted their spill model volume from an offshore blowout, which is something like 500 cubic meters per day times 30 days. That's what they use to model the offshore spill trajectory and things like that. Why they redacted that, I have no idea, but I was able to extract that information anyway from this. And I asked the folks yesterday, the government people, and they had no answer to it. There is simply no reason to redact something like that. The whole purpose of a spill model is to communicate to the public what would happen if. So, the next issue is the Leviathan 2 blowout, and we've asked the government about this. When they were drilling the Leviathan 2 well in 2011, it had a catastrophic failure of the well. And they were not in the reservoir, they say. They say they were, just about maybe 3,000 meters beneath the seabed, had a blowout, complete failure of the well, had to disconnect the drilling rig from the wellhead, and it was blowing out brine, formation water, and dense saline brine, it continued for 16 months.
What is right?
Brine, it's just this heavy salt water. The formation water, it's in the reservoir. Above the reservoir, they say there were no hydrocarbons released, but who's to know? But the biggest problem here is why didn't they try, what failed in their drilling system and their blowout preventer, that they have a blowout preventer on the top of every well. What failed there, number one?
But this is in the production well, it's not in the processing area.
No.
It was an exploration well in Leviathan 2. It was drilled in 2011, so 7 years ago. It continued, the free flow of the well continued for 16 months. Apparently they didn't even try to intervene to cap it and plug it. And that to me shows a number of systemic problems in the government-Noble drilling relationship that need to be resolved. The government tried to assure us yesterday that they fixed all the problems from energy and environment, that they fixed all these problems. I'm not confident. They say they have a report on this that they may or may not provide to us, but we need to see that. Regardless, it shows that Noble had made commitments, that they had a drilling safety program that would never permit such a well failure. They had a well failure on their second well. So that means to me, we've got some serious issues here. And that was not a production well. It was not into the reservoir, or else you would have had a lot of gas and condensate out. But it does mean, methodically, they've got some issues. Moving quite quickly through this, and then we'll turn it over to Amy. The oil spill contingency plan that they have, the only one they have to date that I've had access to is the one for the construction phase, and it is completely inadequate. There is no mechanical response, booms and skimmers and such, that's effective on a condensate spill. In the documents, they treat condensate just like they do crude oil, and it's not going to work. And I have this confirmed from the major oil spill response contractor in the UK. There has never been a successful oil response to a condensate spill, ever, anywhere. So we're fooling ourselves if we are trying to tell the public here, don't worry, we'll have a massive response to a condensate release and we'll get it back out of the ocean, because they won't. Their second methodology of responding to
But this is true to the sea as well. If you put a lot of condensate.
Absolutely, it's true no matter where you have a condensate spill.
Yes, and the
but the
amount of
question,
condensate will be much larger
it will be larger if you have a FPSO, but it would be 125 kilometers offshore, so much less likely to impact the coastal continental shelf ecosystem and the shoreline, because you've got another 100 kilometers there. So it's a triage situation. There's advantages and disadvantages in both scenarios. But I want to underscore there has never been a successful response to a condensate spill. There likely never will be. Once it's spilled.
What condensate spill scenario did you research?
Well, the Leviathan project.
In the world.
Where in the world?
Well, the only large one was the one I was involved in this winter in China. And that was the collision of the Sanchi condensate tanker from Iran going to South Korea with a cargo vessel from the US going to China. A straight T-bone collision. The condensate tanker exploded, all crew were lost, 32 crewmen were lost, and the entire load of condensate was lost. A lot of it burned, but not all of it. I have a photograph I'll show tomorrow in the conference at the Alma up in Zircon, condensate coming out of the other side of the tanker. Regardless, that's the largest condensate spill anywhere in history. And it was not studied very effectively, so we know some things about it, but not everything. Chemical dispersants are a number one tool to be anticipated to be used here with any oil spill or condensate spill, and that's basically a surfactant chemical that would be sprayed out of aircraft on a spill across the water surface. I've been involved in these things for years. They generally do not work, and if they work as designed, a dispersant is intended to break up a surface slick of oil or condensate, primarily oil, and then let it form into smaller droplets and disperse down into the water column. So they should never be used anywhere inshore of 200 meters of water depth, I think. the Israeli law permits these to be used in water depths deeper than 20 meters. And I think that's something that needs to be changed because any oil that had dispersant on it could go right into the seabed and continue to contaminate. So that's a problem with dispersants. The other bigger problem is we have no real evidence that dispersant will work on Leviathan condensate. There's been a few studies in Norway that shows in particular specific conditions they have some effectiveness, but in general, mechanical recovery will not work on a condensate spill, and dispersants will not work. So this points to everything we can do to prevent a large-scale release, and certainly in methane releases, there's nothing you can do. Natural gas, methane. We had 400,000 tons of methane come out of the Deepwater Horizon failed well, and it formed these enormous plumes in the pelagic water column.
There was an oil.
Enormous what?
No, this is natural gas. There was oil. There was oil, but I'm talking about the methane, just the natural gas.
What
that
do you
came
do?
From an oil rig, that's what
From
you're
the
saying.
oil rig, but
It wasn't from the, it was from the well.
Oil.
It was from the well,
Yeah,
which
right.
went to the reservoir, which had oil and gas together. And so
Okay.
both of those.
But
The-
how can you compare
Gas.
Deepwater Horizon
Because it's a
to
gas-
the oil rig?
to-
It's the same gas, Nathan, you
Methane.
haven't.
No, yes,
What does it
methane,
do when
but that
it
was an
spills?
oil rig.
It formed, well, it was a rig drilling a well into a reservoir. The reservoir had gas and crude oil in it. This reservoir has gas and condensate at the top, has crude oil at the bottom. So they're not entirely similar, but they're not entirely dissimilar either. The point I was trying to make is that a lot of that gas that came out of the Deepwater Horizon Macondo well formed these enormous midwater plumes. Even though the industry said that'll never happen, it'll all come to the surface and evaporate, it didn't, and formed an enormous midwater plumes that drifted for many miles with a strange bacterial inoculation in these plumes. So it formed its own impact, and that has not even been discussed.
Yes,
in the
but we are
Bible.
talking about the processing platform near the shore. Do you have any example of processing platform in which there was a major incident that caused contamination?
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. There's several.
Natural gas, not oil. Natural
Well,
gas.
there certainly are. I can't cite them right now, but sure, there are platforms in the North Sea. Piper Alpha had an explosion, like something like 80 people were killed in it. They're dangerous. They have had problems, and Noble knows that, and I think the government knows that. They know that this is not a zero-risk operation, and particularly with natural gas, it's very volatile, as is condensate. The other issue with condensate, if it spills on the sea surface, like in the Sanchi tanker disaster, some of it immediately starts evaporating. But if it spills from deep water subsea pipeline, it has a lot of water to ascend through before it reaches the surface. So it will emulsify more, it will dissolve more in the water column, and once it reaches the surface, there will be less of a fraction that evaporates. So a deep water condensate release will be very different than a surface condensate release. I have not seen that discussed in these documents today. I'll finish up here, and then we can do some more questions and have Amy talk as well. Some other quick issues I have are the financial liability protocols within Israel. You know, what a company that commits gross negligence has to pay. And the main reason I bring this up is that is a powerful motivation for responsible corporate conduct. If there's sufficient financial liability on the line. Right now, Israel is a party to 2 of the international tanker oil spill conventions, which are inadequate, in my view, the Civil Liability Convention and the IOPC Fund. But it is not a party to the Supplementary Fund, which gives more coverage. More importantly, it is not a party to the Hazardous and Noxious Substances Convention. It is not a party to the Bunkers, the Fuel Oil Convention. And there is no international convention covering offshore drilling. So you need to have robust national legislation imposing very legitimate financial liability on a company that causes environmental damage or has particularly if it's caused by willful negligence. such as was proven in the BP spill, that they knew they should have done better, they took a risk, they were in a hurry, they took risks, they cut corners, and it had a catastrophic, I'm sorry?
BP in the
In the Gulf of Mexico, right? So that financial liability needs to be reviewed here, and I would encourage it to be fixed before you move forward. The other important thing is the stakeholder engagement plan that Noble has in their documents. It sounds good, but my recommendation is that a Israel Offshore Citizens Advisory Council be required that the industry pay for to be established, that all stakeholder groups within Israel that have an interest in the offshore region have a representative on this council. It has money, annual budget, I'd say $5 million. We have a couple of these in Alaska that we set up. They work remarkably because it evens the power balance between industry and government on the one hand and civil society on the other hand, without the staff and capability and technical capability of really engaging with industry and government on these issues. So we have suggested this to industry, to the government. We'll be meeting this afternoon, reiterating this issue. I think it should have a budget of, say, $5 million a year, guaranteed for the entire lifetime of offshore drilling here.
Presented to whom in the government?
The Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Environment. Yeah. And I've already presented the concept to them, but I will reiterate it this afternoon. And then finally, you need a sufficient royalty and taxation regime where the government gets at least, in my view, at least 50% of the gross revenues from any of these offshore projects, and that at least 50% of these government revenues is saved in a permanent fund. We do this in Alaska. We have an Alaska permanent fund now with $60 billion, which is a savings fund essentially from our oil revenues. And the idea behind that is oil revenues, gas revenues are finite. And once it's gone, it's gone. So as you earn revenues from these finite resources, you need to at least save some, invest it, so you have this money in the future. And I guess one last final thing, that is the government regulatory regime.